I shall just read a portion of this work that will open a new trend of thought. Here in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, there is a chapter on the Master and Keshav. As you know, Keshav Chandra Sen was a prominent disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, was a great intellectual of those days. Who had, in fact, he had visited England. In those days, that was the most prominent part of British Empire, of which India was a part, and that he was invited by the Unitarian churches and delivered a series of lectures. And he was a prominent intellectual of those days. He did not believe in image worship. He did not believe in traditional popular Hinduism, but he believed in the philosophy of Upanishads. He was not an Advaitin. He was not a non-dualist. You can't say he was a Vedantin. Brahma Samaj philosophy was some kind of westernized, Christianized, Hindu Vedic pantheism. That's what it was. He had taken many of the hymns from Vedic literature and used to recite it with great emotion in the Brahma Samaj churches. The churches were also very similar to Unitarian churches, with long benches. They used to perform sermons. So, in a way, it was a reform movement within the fold of Hinduism. Annie Besant was a great Indian nationalist. She was born in Europe, but she was a great Indian nationalist. And she once said, Keshav, while trying to reform Hinduism, Christianized it. So that gives a brief understanding of what Keshav was all about. But he was a very sincere, very honest, spiritual seeker. He used to meditate. So Sri Ramakrishna had a great love and affection for him because Keshav was very humble. He used to meditate a lot. He was a sincere seeker of truth in his own way. Now, this is the chapter dealing with Sri Ramakrishna's interaction with Keshav Chandra Sen. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, bondage is of the mind and freedom is also of the mind. A man is free if he constantly thinks, I am a free soul. How can I be bound, whether I live in the world or in the forests? I am a child of God, King of kings. Who can bind me? If bitten by a snake, a man may get rid of its venom by saying emphatically, there is no poison in me. There is a popular belief in that much only. Now, here Sri Ramakrishna makes a very important point, which is one of the fundamental teachings of Vedanta. If a person can sincerely believe, not believe, but can at heart have the conviction that he is Atman, he is not bound, he is the ever free, that very moment he can or she can become ever free, liberated. But that conviction should be very sincere. It should come from the core of our heart. Now, the difficulty is to reach that level of mental integrity, psychological integrity, and true conviction, where the mind is so pure that the conviction immediately and automatically translates into experience. That's a problem. If a person can reach that level of mental purity, and then if he really believes that he is ever free, he becomes ever free, liberated that moment. But to reach that level of purity, pure conviction, that's the main difficulty. Because in our mind there are so many other impressions we have gathered. We are this body, we are this mind, I am this body which is walking, I am this mind which is feeling happy or unhappy, I am this intellect which is perceiving all these things. So we have hypnotized ourselves, deluded ourselves into so many false convictions that we are just this body, nothing more, nothing less, which means we are just this matter. Or we are just this mind which feels happy and unhappy, suffers and enjoys. So all these wrong convictions should be got rid of, which Swami Vivekananda says dehypnotization. We are hypnotized ourselves into the belief that we are this body. Just this body is the psychophysical mechanism. If we can dehypnotize by the strong conviction that we are not this body, not just this body and mind and intellect, we are something that goes beyond all this Atman, the all-pervading reality, the immanent reality. And if we can have that level of sincere conviction, we can become free that very split second. But this is possible only if we can get rid of all other delusions, wrong convictions that we are this body, this mind, and so on. And this getting rid of wrong ideas, these delusions, is technically called in Sanskrit sadhana chadushtaya, which means 4 important spiritual disciplines. One, first of all, we must have a strong conviction as to what is real and what is unreal. Strong discerning mind. Everything else in this world is in a flux, subject to change, except Atman, the consciousness. That's the first. Second discipline is we should not have any desire for anything, pleasures or happiness in this world or next. Even a desire for going to heaven is a great obstacle. Third discipline, strong conviction in the sacred words of scriptures, which we have thoroughly analyzed, and then purity of mind, concentration, and mental self-restraint of this, restraining the senses and mind. And most important, and that is very important, if you have got that, the other 3 disciplines will automatically follow. That is a strong and intense desire for spiritual enlightenment and liberation. That should be the most important search, goal of all our pursuits. If we look upon religion or spiritual liberation, enlightenment as one of several goals to be achieved, then we cannot have. So, if we just look upon spiritual liberation as the only ultimate goal to be achieved, many other things may be necessary, but the supreme goal is this spiritual liberation, which is called mumukshutva, means desire for liberation, desire for the supreme spiritual freedom. Now, if these 4 disciplines can be achieved, and then if we can believe, well, I am not the psychophysical mechanism, I am this Atman, that moment it is possible. That's what Sri Ramakrishna is. Bondage is of the mind and freedom is also of the mind. Here mind means not the ordinary mind which is always in a flux. What Sri Ramakrishna means, pure mind is non-different from Atman. If we can reach that level of purity, then there is no bondage. Freedom is a matter of daily experience. That's what this is. Now, of course, here is a reference. Yeah, we should clearly understand Sri Ramakrishna's attitude towards other religions. Sri Ramakrishna's uniqueness was, you will be surprised to know if I make this statement, what we today call interfaith relationship, interfaith dialogue, interspirituality dialogue. Sri Ramakrishna was the one who inaugurated this, the era of interfaith dialogue. So you can find there is a well-known painting, some of you may have seen, a picture in which a Christian priest is holding a cross, There is Sri Ramakrishna also. There are some other cult groups, other religious traditions and their representatives, all standing together in perfect unity. There's a picture, famous painting. Sri Ramakrishna had a great respect and reverence for Jesus. In San Francisco Monastery, you find near the shrine there's a very huge photo. Actually, you know what that photo was? It was actually hanging on the walls of one of Sri Ramakrishna's greatest householder disciples. They called Shambhu Malik, whose house was very close to the Dakshineshwar temple where Sri Ramakrishna was living. In those days, the so-called educated elite of Calcutta city used to decorate their rooms, sitting rooms and drawing rooms with the photos of Madonna, Queen Victoria, and so on. That was supposed to be the height of fashion. Now, that gilt-edged photograph that you find in San Francisco Monastery, it was hanging on the walls of one of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, Mr. Malik. He was staying in a house very close to the Dakshineshwar temple, little away. Now, Sri Ramakrishna one day closely was watching at the photo. It's a Madonna's picture, Jesus, baby Jesus in the lap of Virgin Mary. And suddenly Sri Ramakrishna felt that picture came alive and Jesus, and there's a light coming out of it. He felt that way. And on another occasion, Sri Ramakrishna had a kind of transcendental vision. Jesus himself walked towards him and got merged in him. So he had a great respect for Jesus, Buddha, and all other great spiritual teachers. And he had a great admiration for Bible also. Only one small objection he had. It was stressing so much on sin. You are all sinners. You are all damned. That was the only thing that he could not tolerate. So that's what we are dealing with now. Now, Sri Ramakrishna here says, once someone gave me a book of the Christians, Bible, New Testament. Maybe in those days they were not separated. Most of the editions had both New and Old Testaments combined together, bound together. I asked him to read it to me. It talked about nothing but sin. Most probably the reader may not have referred to Beatitudes or some of the great parables of Jesus. Maybe Sri Ramakrishna could not tolerate that reading for a long time, because that gentleman who read it did not go to the fundamental spiritual teachings of Jesus, the Beatitudes or the great parables dealing with the spiritual life. So it was mostly dealing with sin. He talked about nothing but sin. And to Keshav, Sri Ramakrishna is talking to Keshav. You know, Keshav Chandra Sen, incidentally, many of you may not know, he is considered to be one of the forerunners of Indian Christologists. They call Christology, indigenization or Indianization of Christian theology. So there was a great movement to interpret biblical teachings in the light of Indian tradition. And Keshav Chandra Sen and P.C. Majumdar, both of them disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, were great leaders, pioneers in that movement. So he was a prominent scholar, Christian scholar. He was not a Christian by faith, but is a great student and a scholar in biblical studies. Now, to Keshav, Sri Ramakrishna says, it's very important, sin is the only thing one hears of at your Brahma Samaj too. The reason is, Brahma Samaj took many of these ideas from Unitarianism. So the sin ideal also they used to preach in their pulpits, sermons. Sin is the only thing one hears of at your Brahma Samaj too. The wretch who constantly says, I am bound, only succeeds in being bound. He who says day and night, I am a sinner, verily becomes a sinner. Now, the true implication comes later. One should have such burning faith in God that one can say, what? I have repeated the name of God, and can sin still cling to me? How can I be a sinner anymore? How can I be in bondage anymore? So, I am a believer in God. I have surrendered to God. How can surrendering to God be an act of sin? How can anyone remain a sinner even after surrendering to God? It's a great radical, in a way from a spiritual point of view, it is a very, very radical revolutionary concept. And that is something which perhaps modern theologians can take a leaf from. Very radical concept. How can you be a sinner and be a devotee of God simultaneously? It's a very interesting. So Sri Ramakrishna says, one should have such burning faith in God that one can say, what? I have repeated the name of God, I have surrendered myself to God, and can sin still cling to me? If a man repeats the name of God, his body, mind, and everything becomes pure. Why should one talk only about sin and hell and such things? Say but once, O Lord, I have undoubtedly done wicked things, but I won't repeat them. I surrender myself unto you, and have faith in His name, in His yes capital. This is a very, very, very important concept in modern times. I believe maybe it is a very universal idea. The idea that one who surrenders himself to God can completely forget about either inherited sins or some of the mistakes that a person may have committed in the past and can start a new life immediately. This is a great promise that you find in the Gospel. And in another context, after a few more passages, but one cannot be a King Janaka all of a sudden. Janaka at first practiced much austerity in solitude. King Janaka was a great philosopher king of ancient India, who had, as a young man, rather right from childhood, for several decades, he had practiced meditation and contemplation in forest hermitages, studied under great teachers, and had the highest mystical experience. And then he took over as the king of a mighty empire, and is reputed to have become a great, wise king of ancient times, who combined in his life and character the wisdom of a sage and the efficiency of a great emperor. So that's why his name occurs in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad as a great philosopher king. Even if one lives in the world, one must go into solitude now and then. This is an interesting idea. One may live in the world, work in an office, may have to look after many domestic and social responsibilities, which normally we designate as secular activities, but can be made spiritual by turning action into action with wisdom. I mean, karma can become karma yoga. So, it will be of great help to a man if he goes away from his family, lives alone, and weeps for God even for 3 days. This I have already mentioned many times in the 6th chapter of Gita. Krishna repeats this idea. Even a little bit of practice, spiritual practice, becomes a saving factor if done sincerely. I mentioned this earlier, but I will repeat, perhaps many are not heard. In the 6th chapter, Arjuna puts one question to Krishna. The question is this. Well, people start practicing spirituality, meditation, reading of holy scriptures, going to temples, churches, and other places of worship. and then sometimes they do not fully succeed. Before that they may die, or they may have deviation in life. Now what happens to them? This question also is very relevant and very important from modern standpoint. The idea of law of karma and the law of rebirth are very relevant in this context. If you think that you have only one chance, one life, at the end of it, you are either allowed to go to heaven, or you are sent to hell for eternal damnation. Well, then it is in fact a terrible injustice. But Vedanta says you don't have just only one chance. Life moves in cycles. What we do, accordingly, we get the results, if not in this life, in the next life. So you have to think of human existence as a cycle, not as a straight line, which ends somewhere, dead end, at the gate of heaven or hell. No. Vedanta says it's a cycle. So, in one life, a person may do many meritorious deeds and may perhaps do many sinful deeds also, maybe actions which are not desirable. Now, Arjuna asked the question, is it true that we get only one chance, that if we die, if life comes to an end before we reach the ultimate spiritual goal, or if we have a deviation, does it mean that everything is lost? Whatever we have done is lost. Whatever good things we have done, whatever meritorious deeds we have done. We may have meditated for several years, but then we did something wrong, and then everything collapses. Is it so? Krishna says it is not so. Krishna's answer is, it is not so. Partha naiveha namutra vinashas tasya vidyate nahi kalyana krit kaschit durgadim tata gacchati. It's a Sanskrit verse. Arjuna's question is, ayadi shraddhayopedo yoga chalidamanasaha aprapi yoga samsiddhim kam gadim Krishna gacchati. Question is this. Ayadi means a person who doesn't succeed in spiritual life, who doesn't achieve complete restraint, control of our mind, and then have a deviation or a fall or premature death. Is everything lost? Now, answer is this. The answer that Krishna gives. No. Kalyana krit kaschit technically means any person who does a little spiritual practice. It may be in your whole life you have meditated only once, but that you did with great sincerity. You may have read some holy book with great concentration and contemplated on the meaning of it. Or you have listened to some great ideas. These ideas have registered in your mind, creating an impression. Or you have chanted some holy hymns. Or you have thought of the transcendental reality. Even if a little practice, if you have done only very little, Sri Krishna says that little practice will become a saving factor. So, in the next life, this little spiritual practice that you have done will remain in your spiritual account. And sometime in future, when you find yourself in a set of circumstances which are conducive, which are helpful for spiritual practices, you will have a tendency to make use of those circumstances. If you are passing in front of Vedanta society or any holy place, and if you find there is a retreat going on, well, let me go and listen to that. That tendency comes only if you had deposited at least a small amount if in this life or the previous life. Otherwise, nobody can withstand the onslaught of Vedanta. See, somebody who tells you you are the immanent reality, the omnipresent reality, the transcendental reality, and you are talking about God who doesn't offer you anything except spiritual enlightenment. It is certainly not worth much in terms of material benefits. Vedanta doesn't offer you heaven. Heaven is nothing but permanent stay in 5-star, 10-star hotel, perhaps, nothing more. So Vedanta offers, Vedanta tells you that you are not the psychophysical mechanism, we are the all-pervading, omnipresent, immanent, transcendental reality. This is certainly, there is nothing very pleasant about hearing this. It becomes attractive only if spiritually we have reached that level. If Vedanta ever thought that there is a God whom you can pray and he will answer all your questions and he will solve all your problems, if we can understand. But Vedanta doesn't do that. Vedanta doesn't help you to get any material benefit. It just tells you that you are not this psychophysical mechanism. You are not just this body. You are something beyond all this, the omnipresent, all-pervading reality. And once you realize this, you enjoy eternal bliss. All these things are certainly not worth much in terms of material. It's nothing very attractive about it. So even to be able to withstand this onslaught, we must have imbibed some Vedantic ideas in the past life. Here Sri Krishna says, if you have done a little bit of spiritual practice, that will remain in your account. So in future, these impressions and tendencies, what we call vrittis, which have accumulated in the mind, will come to the surface and will force you to move in the same direction till you reach your supreme goal. So nothing is lost. That's what Krishna says. Now, here Sri Ramakrishna says, if a man repeats the name of God, his body, mind and everything becomes pure. And if he does it for a little while, then also it gives him great benefits. So why should one talk about sin and hell and such things? Talk about God. Then he said, to my divine mother, I prayed only for pure love. I offered flowers at her lotus feet and prayed to her, Mother, here is thy virtue, here is thy vice. Take them both and grant me only pure love for thee. Means pure devotion. That's what Sri Rama says. That's why he says, even if one lives in the world, one must go into solitude now and then. It would be of great help to a man if he goes away from his family, lives alone, and weeps for God even for 3 days. Even if he thinks of God for 1 day in solitude, when he has the leisure, that too will do him good. So that's what it is. 1 day. Sri Ramakrishna says 1 day will do. But if that is done in solitude, there is a psychological reason why Sri Ramakrishna emphasizes solitude. Narada's commentary, Narada's aphorism, Narada Bhakti Sutras, the two great devotional philosophers, Narada and Shandilya, their technical books extol this practice. It should be done in solitude, not as a part of a congregation. There's a great psychological fact in it. No? When we are in solitude, we are closer in our communion with God. If 10,000 people assemble in a playground and pray, or in any place, everyone is in the presence of everyone else. So we are aware of the presence of all others. Here we are in the company of ourselves. We are in our own company. And the only other person who knows that we are praying is God. So that's why Gandhiji, while he has written elaborately on prayer, he used to hold prayer meetings with huge gatherings. But he used to pray For his own spiritual benefit, he used to pray alone, in solitude, in his room. So Gandhi says, pouring out our heart is possible only only when we are alone. But congregational prayer is certainly beneficial, because so many people thinking along same lines create a great vibration, spiritual vibration. That is helpful. For a beginner, praying in groups is good, but to register the impression strongly in our mind, prayer in solitude is much more helpful, because we are not in need of satisfying anyone. We can be lonely, and we can sincerely pour out our heart to God. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna says he should move away from his or her family alone and live alone and then pray alone. Even if he or she thinks of God for one day in solitude, when he has the leisure, that too will do him good. So solitude is stressed here. People shed a whole jug of tears for wife and children and husbands, but who cries for the Lord? Now and then one must go into solitude and practice spiritual discipline to realize God. Living in the world and entangled in many of its duties, the aspirant during the first stage of spiritual life finds many obstacles in the path of concentration. So it's a very important idea is stressed here. Now we can discuss. If you have anything else to discuss, we can discuss before taking up another topic.
I don't know if it's all right to ask you, what are some of the parts or places in the gospel that inspire you? Is it all right to ask you that?
Oh, nothing. It's fine.
Everything.
Yeah, practically everything,
Yes.
because Sri Ramakrishna's gospel is so close to our daily life situations.
Yes, yes.
And Swami Vivekananda, when he first heard about the work of Yam, he greatly admired him. And Swamiji said, now I understand this was reserved for you. See, I remember the uniqueness of gospel as a spiritual classic is it directly addresses some of the problems of people living in society and in family settings. That is a very important, very touching aspect of it.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And Sri Ramakrishna used to privately instruct his monastic disciples, not in the presence of Yam. Yam had no way to fully understand what Sri Ramakrishna might have been teaching the monastic disciples, like Swamiji and others. But Yam was always present, and maybe there is a reason why Sri Ramakrishna chose Yam. Yam was himself in the midst of all these problems. He had to run a huge family, joint family system, and he had innumerable relatives, many of them quarreling with each other. That's why this morning I said he left his home practically to maybe with an intention to commit suicide. So Sri Ramakrishna was indicating you can't do that because even that is not within your power. And then you see, Yam was surprised how Sri Ramakrishna could actually read his mind and gave him a new life. So primarily the gospel is meant for people who are facing innumerable problems and crises in their daily life situations, especially in a family setting. So many of these, including Keshav Chandra Sen. The last time Sri Ramakrishna visited him, maybe few months before he passed away, Kamal Kuti, that's a place where he was living. Sri Ramakrishna went all the way there to his home, Keshav's home. That was the last meeting. Within a few months he passed away. Sri Ramakrishna himself somewhat in a way predicted.
Yes.
So, and all of them were household disciples.
Yes. Yes.
Not monks. See, if Sri Ramakrishna had addressed a group of monks, one could say, well, monks have nothing to do with social problems, no family. So all is perfectly all right for monks. But what about people living in society with children, with husbands and wife and innumerable family connections?
Yes.
How do they go about their daily, the business of running a family?
Yes.
And how do they practice spiritual life? See, yesterday, this morning I mentioned a few Marwari merchants came to Sri Ramakrishna. They were running they had the monopoly of commercial and economic life in Calcutta at that time. They were running all the big business houses of Calcutta. They came to Sri Ramakrishna and they asked Sri Ramakrishna, what will be our fate?
Yes.
A businessman,
Yes.
making profits.
Yes.
They used to accompany the East India Company wherever they went and start business houses. So Sri Ramakrishna said, you don't have to worry. Once a while, you go to a lonely place, a temple or holy man, some spiritual practice and do that. He didn't tell them anything about renunciation. But when youngsters like Swamiji,
Yes.
he was burning with the zeal of renunciation and monastic spirit.
Yes.
When such people came to Sri Ramakrishna, he talked to them about Advaita, non-dualism and monastic, the glory of monasticism. But not to Yam or these people.
Yes. Yes.
So you can find he's down to earth, so practical,
Yes.
so humane and so sensitive.
Yes.
So sensitive to the very ordinary problems of people living in society.
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes he said, no, in Calcutta people are living like worms, he
Yes.
said.
Yes.
He uses very strong language
Yes.
because of worldly mindedness,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But there's so much of compassion. But all his disciples came from there. They came to him and he taught them and he practically, you turn any page here, you find something that's useful, that will
Yes.
teach us something.
Yes. Yes.
So it's very difficult to say
Yes.
because every part of the work is equally
But
inspiring.
monastics find it helpful too.
Yes.
Yes.
Sri Ramakrishna gives many instructions which are very important and relevant to monastics as well in this gospel. Once a soldier came, there was a Sikh regiment, Sikh company. Maybe Sikhs were the loyal soldiers of the British, they were martial race. So they had a regimental headquarters close to the building, and there was an ammunition depot, and they were guarding it.
Yes.
So some of them came to Sri Ramakrishna, and some of them invited him there also. They were hardy people who didn't have any philosophical training. They were perhaps not even literate. But they also got something from him. So they found in him a great teacher.
Yes.
Not only a great intellectual like Keshav Chandra Sen or Vivekananda, but even an ordinary soldier found something in Sri Ramakrishna. He gave them also something.
Yes.
So it was so spiritually uplifting.
Yes.
That's the idea.
Swamiji,
Oh.
Swami Vivekananda always quotes Jesus Christ as saying that those who are pure in heart,
Yes.
they shall see God.
Yes.
So how would you say for the practical person, this purity, would you say just what you explained, just doing all these practices? So how do you define that purity of heart? Compassion or purity of heart?
Purity is in a way indescribable. It is a very abstract, it is something that we can only experience. Jesus also says, somebody, you should be like children. Innocent like children. Now, only children and great spiritually enlightened people can do perfect self-surrender. Because children do that spontaneously because they don't have an afterthought. So they do that, and also great spiritual seekers who have reached that level of purity. That's a supreme goal. But those who have not reached that level, Sri Ramakrishna says, practice meditation, taking the holy name. That's entering the road, entering the path. Once we enter the path and continue traveling, we will reach the goal. That's why sometimes he tells, you don't have to worry about anything, just take the name of God. He tells some devotees. He never tells them to practice elaborate rituals. Purity and childlikeness are stressed, not childishness, but childlikeness are expressed. But that's a high spiritual ideal. Anyone can reach that ideal by practicing the repetition of the name of God, or trying to practice unselfish action by prayer and so on. Sri Ramakrishna gives more importance to prayer than meditation. That you find the gospel throughout. Because he was talking to people who won't perhaps get a lot of time to contemplate and meditate. But he says prayer. So prayer is one easy path to reach that level of purity. That's the idea. Even if people who have not reached that level of purity, if they have selfish needs, if they to pray to God for the fulfillment of their selfish dreams and expectations, that also is not wrong. That is certainly not the highest path. Gita points out, say, Udara sarvai vaide. Udara means noble-hearted. Ato jijnasu artharthi jnani. Those who turn to God in total helplessness. Those who turn to God with a desire to know. And those who want some material benefits. And those who have reached the highest level of knowledge. So, those who are praying to God out of total helplessness, sickness, poverty and so on. And those who pray to God for fulfilling their worldly desires. There is nothing wrong, because instead of turning to anything else, they are turning to God. So in that respect, they are good. But that is not the highest path. And Bhagavad Gita elaborates this point, not Gita text, but from one of the Vaishnava commentaries, not Shankara's commentary. If you pray to God pray to Him to fulfill some of your material needs, and if God answers your prayer and fulfills those needs, then gradually your sense of gratitude to God will force you to continue praying to Him without selfish motive. First, at the beginning stage, people may pray to God for status, money and so on. And once they find God really answers their desires, they become grateful. Instead of turning away from God, there is a set of people who do that. They become more attached to God. You heard of the story, somebody prayed to God, if I get $1,000 lying, bundle of notes lying in the street, I shall donate $500 to the church. But the man, as he was walking, he got a bundle of notes, only $500. So he said, God, you have taken your share first, so I don't have to pay anything. So that's one set of people. Then there's another set of people who will tell you, well, God has answered my prayers, so He is kind towards me. So this will make them pray to Him without selfish motive, without any selfish desire, out of a sense of gratitude. And that will graduate them to a higher spiritual level. So there is nothing wrong about people who pray to God for the material needs. But we should know that that's not the highest level. But we should not always try to start at the highest level. That's the point. So in the gospel you find, the classic example is the businessman who came to him. He said, you need not close your shops and go to forest. Run your business houses. Once a while you pray to God. In solitude you pray. That practice will reduce their greed, and that will take them to a higher level of spiritual evolution. They will not become the greatest devotees all of a sudden. But along with business, they may do philanthropical work. And gradually they will evolve. So it's Sri Ramakrishna's gospel, practically it touches all levels of our spiritual evolution. People belong in different walks of life, different levels of spiritual growth.
So in the last few lines you were talking about solitude. The need for solitude. And I think you mentioned, when we are in the company of others, we are somehow engaged, pleasing them or petitioning them or placating them. In other words, the solitude is, going into solitude is a way of dealing with our own ego, which always comes into play when we deal with another person.
Yes. In solitude, we don't have to please anyone. And second point is, if you pray in solitude, he registers these favorable spiritual impressions with greater intensity in our heart. Whatever we do in solitude, we remember. Whatever we do as a part of in a congregation, perhaps we may not always remember. So whatever we do in solitude with great intensity, with a higher focus on the subject, we remember, and that registers a strong impression in our mind. That purifies the mind furthermore. That's you find in Christian tradition also. Intensity of prayer is possible actually only in solitude. Intense prayer is possible only in solitude.
So much today seems to discourage people from solitude. Today just seems it's just more and more difficult to do that today. But I think it's so essential, as you say. But it's harder, it seems now, for people to go into solitude because there's just so much pulling them and us into sort of the world and into just being with people all the time.
Solitude.
You just have to think of cell phones.
Solitude, yes, true.
Solitude.
Yes.
Solitude need not necessarily mean going away from a group or society. Even in our own room we can be lonely.
That's right.
Lonely is not a pleasant word. Solitude is a more acceptable term, perhaps. Lonely has got many unfavorable, undesirable, painful connotations. So solitude is a matter of our mental approach, I think. So even if you are in a forest, you are in total solitude in a physical sense. But mentally we may be in the midst of a crowd. Your mind is full of agitating, conflicting thought currents. But in our homes, when we are alone in our room, we can certainly try to.
And it's probably from that word solo, isn't it? Which means one. So it's
yes.
really that oneness, isn't it?
Yes.
Oneness with
Yes.
God.
From a psychological point of view, the favorable spiritual impressions are registered much more intensely if spiritual practices are performed in solitude. Otherwise, sometimes you don't get the same level of intensity if you do that in a congregation, prayer or meditation or whatever may be.
But one has to prepare themselves somehow before they go to the place of solitude to be ready to deal with that level of...
Yes. But in our own rooms we can sit, and that is solitude. Solitude, give me our own room.
No, I don't mean physical space, this one.
Oh, of course, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true, that is true. For that, mind should be trained by reading, thinking positive thought currents like that. This is one way to do that. And Sri Ramakrishna is addressing people who are living in the midst of society, social life. In life, even the last decade of 19th century, life was very complex. That was a very crucial period in this field. Just 15, 20 years before this beginning of First World War. Just imagine. It's a very crucial period in this field of the world. So all the challenges of modern science and technology and nihilistic, anarchist thought currents were very strong in those days. So religious fanaticism, all that. So now okay, now we'll take up another subject. Here Sri Ramakrishna makes a point, and that's related to what we discussed this morning, the path of devotion and the path of knowledge. One point that he makes, that is again a repetition of what Krishna says in the Gita, is it's difficult for anyone who identifies himself or herself with the body, mind, intellect, and so on, to practice the path of knowledge. That's the point he makes. So long as we believe this body is real, we have to think that the world is real and everything that goes on around us real. And so long as this world is real and this body is real, the highest idea of God that we can think of is God the Creator. God who created this world, who is compassionate towards His creation, who is merciful, who helps us in solving our problems, who listens to our prayers and pleadings. This is the highest idea of God that we can form, nothing more. So that's the idea behind. And the moment we get rid of this body consciousness, the identification of ourselves with this body, then the world also practically will cease to be the absolute reality. Then we can think of something beyond this world, the absolute reality which goes beyond the creatorship of the phenomenal world. That's the idea behind. So then here Sri Ramakrishna says, but it's not any and every kind of bhakti that enables one to realize God. Bhakti means devotion. What Sri Ramakrishna says is this: the bhakti has got different levels. Certain bhakti is called Vaidhi bhakti, called mechanical devotion. And the highest devotion is a stage in which you think God as the only existing reality. This is the highest level. But before reaching this level, we have to start somewhere. So he says, there is another kind of bhakti known as Vaidhi bhakti, according to which one must repeat the name of God a fixed number of times, fast, make pilgrimages, worship God with prescribed offerings, and make so many sacrifices, and so forth and so on. By continuing such practices a long time, one gradually acquires Raga bhakti. What God cannot be realized until one has Raga bhakti. So that means the ultimate, Prema bhakti, we call the ultimate, the final level of devotional evolution. But what he means is this: you have to start somewhere. For that, you have to, in the beginning, one must begin with a fixed number of practices, which in the beginning may appear to be mechanical. See, every day morning up from 8 to 9 o'clock, I will meditate, 9 to 10 I will read scriptures, or maybe in the evening, and so on. But this is what Swami Vivekananda called the kindergarten of spiritual life. You have to start somewhere. Without going to kindergarten, you can never aspire for the university. But what Swamiji Swami Vivekananda once stated is very, very revealing, that temples and churches and synagogues constitute the kindergarten of spiritual life. And in another context, he says, it is good to be born in a church, but it is terrible to die there. A church here stands for mechanical worship, where the temple, a church, or whatever may be, any kind of, for reading the Gita, reading the Bible, going to a place of worship and praying on a fixed day, in a fixed, acceptable manner, proper manner, and so on. This is all right. Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, they do not condemn this. But this is not a final. One should be able to pray in a church or a temple, but one should also be able to feel the presence of the same God even while coming out of the church or a temple. So, presence of God should not be confined to a place of worship or to a set of rituals, mechanical rituals, which is called Vaidhi Bhakti. So that's why he says, fasting on special days, making pilgrimages, reading books, offering liturgy, sermons, puja, all this, Hindu worship, all this. This is necessary, but this is the beginning of spiritual life. And what Sri Ramakrishna says is, one should transcend this level, go beyond this level to be able to realize God. It means at one stage one should be able to feel the presence of God, not only in a temple but also outside the temple. God, the omnipresent, the immanent reality. So you can see, you can slowly find, even in devotional philosophy, there is a movement from without to within, from gross to subtle, and from many to one. You start with the mechanical rituals, but you end up with the highest transcendental experience, which is technically the same as Vedanta or non-dualistic philosophy. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says in this context. Then he gives the example, an instance of such bhakti is found in the Prahlada. Prahlada is a mythological figure. You find his story is mentioned in the great classic Bhagavata Purana. He was born as the son of a great demon, a monster. His father's main business was to kill all great devotees of God, destroy temples, churches. And anybody who anywhere were meditating and praying, he will pounce upon them and kill them. That was his main job. And the greatest devotee, the archetypal devotee, was born as his son. So the mythological work puts in a very allegorical way. This man was searching God everywhere, but ultimately God was found hiding within the heart of his own son. Say, allegory says. So, and the boy, little child, was tortured by his father for repeating the name of God, for meditating, and he was taught to do all kinds of evil things. But the boy won't listen. Special tutors were employed to teach him to do all evil things. And once this fellow, this demon, his father, called him. Now how is the education progressing? And they said, we are totally helpless. This fellow is always talking about Vishnu, God, and repeating the holy names and all that. He never tells a lie. He is not willing to steal, and he is not willing to injure anyone. So that's such a wicked fellow he is. And then the demon intensified his effort and employed some additional teachers. And at the end of a long period, he called the boy, and little child of 5 years, and then with the great affection, come now, please tell me what your teachers have taught you. They said, I have not learned anything other than this. The Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, Smaranam Pada Sevanam, Archanam Vandanam Dasim Sakhyam Atma Nivedanam. What I have learned is this: one should always listen to God's ideas One should pray to him, one should worship him, one should surrender to him. And the world, all these material things are all fleeting things. God is only reality. This is what I have learned. And the demon got terribly angry, the demon, the evil man. And that's how the story goes. The mythological story goes like that, and Vishnu himself came and killed him. Because he was killing all people, he was insulting, he was torturing spiritual seekers everywhere. This boy is the archetypal devotee. So Sri Ramakrishna used to visit some theaters, drama theaters, yes, Star Theatre. And Girish Chandra Ghosh was a great dramatist. He had dramatized the life of this great devotee boy. And Sri Ramakrishna went there. And when the Prahlada scene came, his own father torturing the little boy, little son, Sri Ramakrishna burst into tears. All that you find in the Gospel of Sri. So then you find here the great instruction given by the boy is Kaumara Acharet Prajna, means one should start spiritual life when he or she is very small. That is one great instruction. But the little boy gives to posterity. It's a find in the Gospel. So Prahlada is considered to be one archetypal devotee. Okay, now here a great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. He's a great devotee, Vijay Krishna Goswami. He was a leader of Brahma Samaj. He was, in fact, there was a difference of opinions and views between Keshav Chandra Sen and Vijay Krishna Goswami. He was a great devotee. So Keshav Chandra Sen didn't like him. He was a conservative devotee. Is bhakti or devotion alone sufficient for the attainment of God, for his vision? The question is put by Vijay Krishna Goswami. Sri Ramakrishna says, yes, one can see God through bhakti or devotion alone, but it must be right bhakti, prema bhakti or raga bhakti, means bhakti of the highest devotion, in which one doesn't pray for anything other than bhakti itself. You pray to God only for one thing. Oh God, please bless me with devotion for you. The greatest prayer is for devotion itself. That's highest prayer. And so a true devotee doesn't pray for anything other than devotion itself. You can find this in the writings of all the great mystics like Saint Teresa, Avila, all that. Praying nothing but, not praying for anything else other than devotion. It's the highest devotion. So very often one problem that devotees feel, they ask when they read about this highest devotion is it possible for all of us to reach that devotion? So I mentioned earlier. In the Gospel you find Sri Ramakrishna says that we should not pray for anything other than devotion. Anything other than knowledge, supreme spiritual liberation. Now, people living in society, as you know, is it possible to practice this devotion? So, Sri Ramakrishna says one should always aim at reaching this level of bhakti, devotion. As I quoted the Gita, there are 4 types of devotees. There are those who pray for material things, those who are praying out of total helplessness like sickness, those who pray out of curiosity, and those who are the highest devotees, who knows that God is only reality. So, because Sri Ramakrishna stresses that the highest devotion alone can take you to God realization, he doesn't mean that it is wrong to pray for anything else. All cannot start with the highest. Somehow turn to God, turn our mind and our senses away from the world and towards God. Even if we cannot practice the highest prema bhakti or the highest devotion, you can start with mechanical devotion. If at least you should start somewhere. For the kindergarten, you have to start somewhere. The lowest grade we have to start. So in the beginning we can start reading with great devotion, maybe half an hour every day. That will slowly help us to evolve to a higher level of devotional life. So that is the comprehensiveness of the gospel. It gives a place to everyone. It gives a place to everyone. That's an idea behind it. It's not a mystical book. It's a spiritual classic. It contains highest mystical spiritual wisdom. At the same time, it gives some direction for everyone to start with. Any discussions?
Did you say that was from the bhakti point of view? The bhakti practice is this type of prayer?
Yes, bhakti means devotion. Bhakti is devotion. Yes, yes. Bhakti is, yeah.
What happens, like for me especially, I know, I'm still in the kindergarten level. I know what I have to do, but I just can't progress. What is it? Same thing, like read more, meditate more. Is that what you would advise?
Well, reading, meditating and attending these discussions. See, one point that I want to stress. Sometimes people feel, well, we should practice, we must have experience. So listening to these lectures and reading won't help. Here is a great mistake. Listening to these ideas and readings or discussion among fellow devotees is also a great help in consolidating and evolving in devotional life. This is very important. For a true devotee, any association with these spiritual ideas, including attending retreats or reading or discussing these things with your family members or with your friends, all become part of spiritual sadhana, spiritual life. So in that respect, we should not compartmentalize. We should not draw lines. So no little practice, no rest of the secular life. No. That line of demarcation should vanish. This is very important. Often, as I said this morning, we look at our life in fragments. Morning 1 hour meditation, evening 1 hour meditation, and then the rest of worldly life. It's not really so. Because there is no such thing as worldly life. The so-called worldly life, worldly activities, if you do with spiritual outlook, it ceases to be worldly life. This line of demarcation should vanish. And this is possible always by trying to keep in mind these ideas. Trying to live in contact with these ideas. It need not necessarily by meditating alone or by reading alone. At other time when you are engaged in office work, when if your duty, there's a duty you have to perform. Somehow establish a link between the secular and spiritual, so that even the secular itself becomes spiritual. Secular merges with the spiritual. That's why that's one way to evolve from the mechanical to the higher level. At the mechanical level, what do you mean? Morning I have meditated, no more spiritual activities. The rest of till evening, all secular worldly activities. Now, if we continue this without mechanically, if we continue this, we won't make any progress. It's like living in kindergarten for 60 years. What will happen? Spiritual kindergarten. So very often live in spiritual kindergarten for decades. So to evolve and to graduate to the next level of spiritual evolution, we must try to link whether attending a retreat or doing your office work, or maybe discussing with your family people, reading the Gospel or Gita in the company of your family members. That's also spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is not something that you do only in Vedanta society or in a temple. That fragmentation is a very wrong idea. In fact, that is the main cause of conflicts. People get into conflicts. To do spiritual life, but there are many other things which I do which are not necessarily spiritual. That idea should go. In fact, this fragmentation creates conflicts in mind. In fact, that also sometimes expresses in the form of, well, I'm not making enough progress. No, that's not so. It's clear.
Thank you.
Swami, could I just say, what you said is so true. I just wanted to say how much coming to the retreats over the years has helped me. I used to think, when I would come to the retreat, then I could practice, and then when I went home it was different. But what I've tried to do over the years is do some of the things at home that I do here, like read some of the gospel, say in the morning, just even if it's just a paragraph, and just other things. And it was a big revelation to me when I saw that I needed to turn my home life into a retreat, in the best sense. And so I've really tried to make that link or bring practices from here, home. And it really has helped so much.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say that was so true.
In fact, the gap or the line of demarcation between the secular and spiritual is an artificial one.
Right.
That is something that we create in our imagination. And so long as we think it is real, there will be always conflicts. Fragmentation is a serious problem in psychology also. So by reading every day, even in our homes, we can narrow this gap between the secular and spiritual, and finally it vanishes. That's why Gandhi, again, why I'm quoting Gandhi. Gandhi is not recognized to be a saint, though he was a very saintly figure. He was an extremely saintly figure, but he is not a saint or a sage in the same sense which Jesus Christ or Shankaracharya or Ramakrishna Paramahansa or Vivekananda. We don't bracket Gandhi in that category because they didn't have to worry about engaging in so many activities, including political agitations. Now, Gandhiji, it is said, as a spiritual practitioner, he was a great man. Now, Gandhiji he used to pray every day, and he never felt tired, and he never repented of what he did. Sometimes he will fast for, he will start a fast, proclaiming a fast for 21 days. And then half the way he will stop. Some people have diverted from his non-violent path, so he wanted to stop the fasting. All these things he did, but he never really repented of what he did, because he always thought, and he thought everything that he did as a karma, as an act of selfless action, karma yoga. From an external point of view, we find Gandhi suddenly giving a call for agitation, then withdrawing this agitation. That's a different matter. But in his own mind, he was supremely convinced the righteousness of what he did, and he was completely devoted to that. Why I'm giving Gandhi's example? Because Gandhi was very much in the midst of social and political activities. So nobody could be more busy than Gandhi. He was busy creating problems for a whole empire, agitating, organizing whole nation and unifying people against the British rule and all that. So it's a typical example, I find. That's why he could inspire people. He not saints and sages living in the Himalayas. He inspired politicians and social reformers and thinkers who were in the midst of activities. So he's a great example. He was a great practitioner of this Vedantic ideal that you find in the Gospel. I think Gandhi has written a famous introduction to this. Somewhere you find maybe the Indian edition. There is a great, well-known write-up by Gandhi, some kind of introduction to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Gandhi said that Sri Ramakrishna's words enable one to see God face to face. These are his words.
Well, there's that book by Vincent Sheen, and he said in there that without Ramakrishna there wouldn't have been a Gandhi. I think that he was quoting Gandhi, saying that his roots went right back.
Yes. Gandhi was highly inspired by Sri
There was
Ramakrishna.
that book called Lead Kindly Light that came out long time ago.
Lead
by
Kindly
Vincent
Light.
Sheen.
Oh yes, we got in a
It
sentence.
was about that.
Yes.
So maybe at a practical aspect, like every day when we do our work, daily work, we can say in the big morning, God, what we do today is for you. And then sometimes we forget in the middle of the day, we get angry, but end of the day again, Lord, what we did was for you. I know we didn't behave the way you wanted us to behave. But just surrender what we do. What else can we do?
So that kind of attitude is a great help. It's a great help. Any other topic for discussion? Oh, please.
So, when you talked about levels of bhakti, so surrender is at which stage?
Surrender is the last. It's called prapatti or sharanagati. Surrender is a technical term used in the Vaishnava philosophy. I shall explain this. This prema bhakti or raga bhakti that Sri Ramakrishna uses, these are terms used in the works of the devotional philosophers like Narada, Shandilya, etc. And prapatti or sharanagati are the terms used by Vaishnava philosophers like Ramanuja. These are two, both belong to bhakti schools, but two different schools of thought. Narada and Shandilya lived in ancient times, Ramanuja lived in the 12th century. So he uses the word sharanagati or bhakti. So a person who has reached the highest bhakti level, this sharanagati or self-surrender becomes natural to him. These terms evolved in different periods, So self-surrender or sharanagati or prapatti are the terms used by Vaishnava philosophers like Ramanuja and others. And raga bhakti and prema bhakti are the terms used by Narada and other earlier philosophers of the Pauranic times. Maybe 2000 years before Christ they may have lived. Yes. At the experience level they are the same. Yes. Anybody?
So in the few other spiritual discussions that I've been in, retreats here, commonly this question comes up, what Rekha was saying about spiritual progress. We want to measure, we want something tangible. Where am I? Am I going? Where am I going? Holy Mother says about the person sleeping in the cot and you're taken somewhere, you're sleeping, you don't know how far you have traveled. So when you're continuously doing practice, you don't know how much progress you've made towards your goal. What does Ramakrishna say about measuring spiritual progress? It's not necessary to just keep going?
Yes, Sri Ramakrishna doesn't focus on this subject of measuring one's own spiritual progress, but by and large in Bhakti tradition, when you reach a level of spiritual growth in devotional evolution, you feel a kind of inner contentment. And inner contentment, which is only a matter of inner experience. We feel that we are on the right track. But Sri Ramakrishna uses our own mind becomes our guru, our guide. When we progress, when we are on the right track and progress for some distance, then our own mind becomes our guide and teacher. We instinctively start experiencing some kind of inner blissfulness. In fact, this is one measuring. We cannot call it with a measuring rod, but this is something. So a kind of inner contentment. So in the lives of mystics, you find at the beginning there is a lot of struggle. Then there is a period where you have made some real progress, but you don't feel it. you feel that you are going through a period of emptiness. But really, you have made some progress. Otherwise, you won't feel it. At the third stage, you feel you are on the right track. You feel you are progressing. So these 3 stages you find. In the beginning, there's a lot of struggle to cope with some of the problems that we have to encounter. The beginning of spiritual life, period of struggle. At second stage, we get established and make some progress, sometimes a lot of progress, but we feel a period of emptiness, dark night of the soul, whatever you may call it, a period of spiritual inertia, dissatisfaction. We feel that we have not achieved anything. Actually, if we have not achieved anything, we have not feel that kind of emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
See, the very fact that you feel you have not made enough progress shows that you have moved away from the stage where you started. That's one thing. The third stage, when you get established, you feel you are on the right track. You can find this in the lives of mystics, and of course in Indian devotional tradition, the dark night of the soul, there such expressions are not there, but a period of discontentment, mental inertia, all these are stated in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and also in devotional life. So that's fine. Yes. So I think we have just about 5 minutes more, if not. Anything else to discuss? Anybody?
Swami, you just mentioned that perhaps a milestone,
Perhaps?
a milestone,
Ah.
a marker
Ah.
for your own spiritual development is a feeling of contentment.
Yes.
When you started talking today, you talked about freedom.
Ah.
Do you also perhaps get a sense of freedom or is when you have sort of unity with Atman, that's very nice progress spiritually. An attribute is a sense of freedom, but is freedom also something that you're looking in your everyday life to sort of feel, to that there's a sense of freedom about your life?
Freedom, yes. In fact, this freedom expresses itself as some kind of blissfulness.
Okay.
See, freedom is always associated with happiness, and blissfulness is a very abstract, subtle essence of what we call happiness. Happiness, in its empirical sense, means something which comes and goes, associated with gaining something, which is invariably related to losing it. But blissfulness goes beyond both. So in a way, blissfulness goes beyond happiness and unhappiness. It is an inner contentment. So even before or without achieving the highest spiritual goal of, you may call it mystical experience or the unity of Atman, Jivatma, Paramatma, what you call the highest devotion, whatever may be. But even before and without achieving that, we feel a kind of inner contentment when we make spiritual progress. We feel we are on the right track. We may not have reached the goal. That feeling comes. In fact, it is that which helps us to continue our journey. You feel that at one stage or other. That's what really draws people towards these higher spiritual ideas. Where nothing else to be gained. So inner blissfulness is certainly not related to the gain of anything empirical. So it should be something transcendental, feeling of contentment, inner contentment.
So freedom, blissfulness, inner contentment are all sort of
blissfulness.
Okay.
That make equations seem to be mathematically correct. Because contentment may not necessarily be associated with freedom, sense of inner freedom. They both come together, it's kind of blissfulness. Especially it is not associated with anything empirical. It is purely transcendental. So that's the idea. Look at the experiences of Buddha. He saw a dead body, he saw a sick man, he's an old man, and then he saw the face of an ascetic. An ascetic who had nothing to lose, but there was something on his face. And Buddha wanted to be like him. He left his home, he became Buddha later. So just imagine that. Okay. So, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.